before that, about Ezri. I don't know, some of you know, some of you don't know. Before Soli, I was at the Ezri Center, and all I can say is that any help, any support, anything I needed, Ezri was absolutely helpful and solved problems. Not only the Ezri Center of today, but also the Ezri Center I was as the head, is very grateful to him and to his family, and we love to have you guys. This is wonderful. The subject today is, I'd say, political, more political. The previous one was economic and cultural and political as well. But this one, I think, looks more political. We should begin with Yossi Alpher. Yossi is a former official in the Mossad. By the way, when he was official in the Mossad, I didn't know that the Mossad was there. You couldn't say, nobody spoke about the Mossad. Things are changing so radically.
המוסד לביטוח לאומי.
Yes, of that we knew. He's a former director of the Justice Center at the Strategic Studies at Tel Aviv University. In January 2015, he published his Periphery, Israel's Search for Middle East Allies, Roman and Littlefield, which discusses Israel's periphery doctrine in the country's early decades, including the strategic underpinnings of Israeli-Iranian relations. And I believe that at least it's five. I would know Iran was eventually became the main periphery ally that we had. By the way, nobody mentioned today, until now, the Kurds. The Kurds were an ally as well, but without the Iranians, nothing. Maybe we have a few seconds, I'll tell you a wonderful conversation I had with Masoud Barazani about this thing. And he was very angry at me, not because me personally, because I was an Israeli. He said to me, Amasya, I'm so angry at you. So, but then we had lunch all the same. So it was a fascinating, but it shows you that the Kurds have very long memory. Well, not that long, but long enough. The book is available in Hebrew, called מדינה בודדה, החיפוש החשאי של ישראל אחר בעלות ברית, באזור. This month, his book, new book, No End of Conflict, Rethinking Israel-Palestine, will be published. Wonderful. So we are all yours for 20 minutes. Yossi, please.
Thank you, Amatya. Just to follow up, here's the book in English and in Hebrew, and I'll show it to you because I'm basing my remarks on my Mossad experience with the Periphery Doctrine and with the alliance with Iran and the follow-up research I've done, which is also in the book, on something I call periphery nostalgia, which will be the second part of my remarks, but I don't think I can go into the question of Israel's relationship toward Iran, or attitude toward Iran in the post-Shah era without saying a few words about, from my point of view, the strategic intelligence alliance we had with Iran, about the Israeli attitudes toward Iran as they emerged and developed during the Shah's era. Now, I started right off with the books. I do want to thank both Sally and Meir for bringing me here to Ezri Center. It's a great privilege to be here and to have the opportunity to talk about this. We had, in the years 57, 58, until the fall of the Shah in 79, a little over 20 years, we had a strategic alliance. Israel had a strategic alliance with a triangular alliance with Iran and Turkey. It was called in Hebrew Khalil, in English Trident. The Iranians and Turks knew it as Trident. And from the Israeli standpoint, this was an extremely important part of the infrastructure we built up in the region within the framework of the Periphery doctrine. Very briefly, the idea of the Periphery doctrine, which emerged in the mid-50s under Ben-Gurion, was that we're surrounded by a hostile ring of Arab states under the emerging leadership of Gamal Abdel Nasser. We are unable to find any modus vivendi with them. We're going to reach out to the periphery of the Middle East. The idea of periphery of the Middle East is an Israelo-centric idea. On our maps, we're in the center. There's a ring of Arab states around us, and the periphery is Iran, Turkey, Ethiopia, initially Sudan as well, eventually South Sudan, all the way to Morocco. It's a geostrategic concept. Periphery doctrines have been invoked by other countries as well, and it's always the same, in effect, the same story. The idea was we built up these strategic relationships with the periphery. This sends a message to the Arab core that they cannot defeat us, that they're going to have to reckon with us, that we have friends on their flanks and friends who share our suspicions of them. Whether these are countries like Iran or minorities like the Kurds, eventually South Sudan, even, if you like, the Maronite story of the minority periphery that went bad. Iran and Turkey were the northern triangle. There was a southern triangle initially of Ethiopia and Sudan. Sudan, by 58, decided it was an Arab country and dropped out. We remained with Iran and Turkey for those 20-some years. And during those years, you heard about the energy relationship, which was obviously very important. There was a very strong intelligence relationship, a strategic relationship, which led, by the time a year before the fall of the Shah, to Ezra Weizmann laying the groundwork to sell the Iranians a know-how for strategic weapons, Jericho missiles. Even as the Shah's regime was crumbling, there were still Israelis who were interested in doing this and who believed in the alliance. My take, looking back, and I was involved in this at the time, and I've talked to everybody else who's alive who was involved in this from the strategic and intelligence standpoint, my take is that this was a lopsided relationship. We invested a genuine emotional element. The idea of renewing the ties with the successors of Cyrus the Great was important to us. It was important just as the ties with Haile Selassie in Ethiopia were important. In Iran, it's Cyrus the Great. In Ethiopia, it's King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Now, our Iranian and Ethiopian correspondents were happy to encourage this, of course. But from their standpoint, it was a very cynical point of view. They couldn't understand this emotional element that the Israelis are investing in. I dare say from the standpoint of those Israelis who noted this element, this was a validation of the Zionist narrative. They're native peoples of the Middle East who long preceded the Arabs, so are we. And here we have our strategic relationships among us. So this was a heavier Israeli investment than it was an Iranian investment. There was even the element not only in the relationship with Iran, but in Morocco, not with the minorities, but with the Turks as well, that they, from their cynical standpoint, we were very useful because we were a pipeline to the American Jewish lobby and to Washington, to power in Washington. I remember when the Shah asked us in the 75, 76, 77, do something about those Iranian students in Washington who are campaigning against me. You guys can do it. Among ourselves, we cynically called this the program.
Yes.
Okay? In other words, okay, we didn't run to Abe Foxman and the ADL to complain, but rather we cultivated it. But among ourselves, this was, okay, they're anti-Semites. How can we use this to enhance our influence in Tehran? What favors can we do from them to Washington? We always could do some favors. The Turks had the same attitude toward us, by the way. Now, and here I'm moving toward the fall of the Shah, one key element of this relationship was that the Shah, for his own ostensibly good reasons, would not tolerate anyone, whether it's Israelis or Americans or French or whatever, having any relationship whatsoever with the Iranian opposition, with the relics of the Mossadegh era, or anybody else, or the student organizations abroad. I remember myself as a Mossad collection officer in the mid-70s abroad, being asked to keep an eye on student opposition elements. We're doing a favor for the Shah by keeping an eye on them. We never conceived of the need to get to know this opposition better, precisely in order to protect our interests in the regime. And this was a huge mistake on our part. So by the time the revolution came along, we found that there were obviously some Israelis who had long experience in Iran, Farsi speakers, people who had been diplomats in Iran, businessmen, representatives of the Mossad, who thought they understood Iran. And part of their illusion that they understood Iran was the fact that they had absolutely no knowledge of the opposition, whether it was student opposition or religious opposition. And so here, and this is my segue to the issue of the relationship afterward, I found myself, I've never been to Iran. I haven't been before, certainly haven't been since, but I found myself in charge of intelligence analysis on Iran for the state of Israel during the revolution. And I say for the state of Israel because the relationship was so sacred, and these were allies. You don't spy on your allies. So military intelligence didn't deal with it. The Mossad had one desk to deal with this. And that was me at this point in time, with really no prior knowledge. And I had to try to understand the revolution. And I went around and talked to all the old Iran hands in the Mossad, in the foreign ministry, and compared what they said to what was happening in the field, and very quickly understood that they didn't have a clue what was happening. But neither did I. And so it came about that in January 79, after the Shah had packed up his 70 suitcases and left to exile, and appointed Shapur Bakhtiar, the most moderate of the opposition, as caretaker prime minister, that our representative, the Mossad representative in Tehran, Eliezer Tafril, from here in Gezi is called in by Bakhtiar, whom we didn't know. None of us knew. Even the most moderate opposition person we didn't know. And Gezi is called in, and Bakhtiar says to him, and I'm quoting from Gezi's top secret cable to Khakhofi, the head of the Mossad. Bakhtiar says to him, I have one request from you Israelis. Kill Khomeini. Khomeini, but at this point, is in Neufle-le-Château in France. And Haka has an emergency meeting, and I get a call to come up to his office. And I find sitting there a senior representative of Caesarea, which is the unit which would carry out the deed if it's going to be carried out. And another of the old Iran hands who had been our representative there and who thought he understood Iran. And Haka says, Bakhtiar called Gezi, said, I have one request from Israel, kill Khomeini. What do you say? Oh, and he added one other thing, Haka. Haka was a very smart man. He said, I want you all to know, I do not approve of political assassination. But we have to talk about this. So what do you all say? And he looks at me, and then the old Iran hand next to me interrupts and says, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. We can leave Khomeini alive. He's not going to do anything. The army will take care of him. The Sabak will take care of him. Nothing to worry about. This was the image of so many people who knew only the Shah's regime. And Haka then looks at me, and I think for a minute and run through my mind all the ramifications that I can think of. But at the end, I have to say to him, you know what? We don't know enough about Khomeini for me to make an intelligent judgment. And that was the end of that. I later found out that Bakhtiar had made the same request of the CIA, MI6, and the French stick. And they all turned him down. I don't know what their internal deliberations were, but certainly some of the analysts I talked to from those countries had the same sense of, we don't have a clue. We don't know. Now we move into the post-Shah era and encounter what I call periphery nostalgia. Periphery. And in Israel, it basically takes the form of the assertion on the part of all these decision makers for whom Iran was the Iran of the Shah. That the rise of Khomeini to power and the birth of the Islamic Republic are an accident of history that can be reversed. Because this is not the real Iran. The real Iran is Cyrus the Great. The real Iran embraces us. The real Iran has so much in common with us against the Arab world that this is an aberration, and we have to deal with it as such. Let me read you two definitions of periphery nostalgia. The first, my own, as follows. Periphery nostalgia is the presumption that because Iran has historic tensions with the Arab world, and because one Iranian regime, that of the Shah, seemingly aligned itself strategically with Israel over the course of 2 decades, the pattern of alliance and shared strategic interests must, through some form of historical determination or strategic norm, continue to manifest itself. A second definition comes from the guy who replaced me trying to understand Iran immediately after, in the years immediately after the revolution, Dan Eldar, who encountered the same phenomenon and explained it as follows. Intelligence and academic experts, remember this is already the era of Khomeini. Intelligence and academic experts outside of Iran adjusted slowly to the change that took place there. For many years, their thinking and analysis failed due to the shock of surprise and helpless anger over their failure to anticipate the revolution and due to intellectual and mental difficulties in digesting the Islamic revolution. These failings found expression in a strong desire, sometimes conscious and sometimes not, to turn back the wheel of history. The hope to quickly restore the Shah's regime resonated negatively on the intelligence assessment regarding Khomeini's Iran. Intelligence consumers and decision makers sought in the early days of the Islamic Republic an assessment that would limit its days and announce the first glimmer of the near return of the Shah's regime. Now, a lot of these perceptions on the part of Israeli decision makers And what Don is saying here is that in those years, the intelligence establishment was already saying to the decision makers, you don't understand. These guys are here to stay. You've got to change diskette, as we used to say then. I don't know how you can say this in the era of dis from key. You need to adjust, and yet they didn't want to adjust. And the periphery nostalgia took two alternative forms. One was to hook up with all kinds of Iranian exiles, or scoundrels of one sort or another, who basically tried to say to us, look, we have the keys to changing the regime. Work with us, and this is a flimsy regime that has no basis in popular support. Work with us, and you can do this. You can topple the regime. And the other was to link up to people from within the regime, some more moderate, some who actually believed what they were saying, and others who didn't, who said, look, work with us inside the regime, and we will moderate it. We will gradually bring it back to being able to work with you. These were the two forms this took. If you want the quintessential example of periphery nostalgia folly, it's the Iran-Contra scandal of the mid-80s, which of course involved Lebanon, involved Hezbollah, involved the United States as well. But from the Israeli standpoint, you had people at the decision-making level and operational echelon who were prepared to ignore the advice of the intelligence establishment. By this time, military intelligence is involved as well, and Mossad and military intelligence are saying, drop this. This is not serious. It's not going to get you anywhere. And yet these people, who had enough backing at the highest echelon, are saying, no, we've got to link into the regime. If we sell them this missile and that and whatever, we can reconstitute the Iranian-Israeli relationship. They were blatantly ignoring all the advice they got, and ended up getting us into a pile of trouble, in particular with the United States. If you want, but the thinking that underwent, and I emphasize again, not all Israelis, veterans of Iran under the Shah, behaved this way, but enough did, certainly to bring about Iran-Contra. And if you want a few more up-to-date references, not from the mid-80s, but from more recently, here is none other than Meir Dagan, who proposed to the United States in the summer of 2007 that, quote, Israel and the United States can replace the regime in Iran. Minister of Defense Ehud Barak described by Ali Shabit as the decision maker in a key interview in Haaretz in August 2012. The real story is the contest between Iran's nuclearization and the fall of the current regime of the Ayatollahs in Iran. If we succeed in pushing off the nuclear program by 6 or 8 or 10 years, there's a good chance that the regime will not survive until it agrees. To conclude, three thoughts about where we are today. First of all, I dare say Prime Minister Netanyahu does not suffer from Iran periphery nostalgia. No, I say this to his credit, because there's still some people around him who do. There's still some people around who do. Secondly, there is periphery nostalgia. I would say, in looking at the attitude of the Obama administration toward Iran, and I'm not talking about the actual substance of the nuclear agreement, but everything else, that as a result of the nuclear agreement, the agreement will float to the surface moderates. And these are people you can deal with and reckon with. And so they have to sit down with the Saudis. They have to listen to this and that. There's a certain sense here that you can get back to the old Iran that was gendarme of the Gulf back in Jimmy Carter's day in the 1970s, and it certainly bears observation. Finally, there is talk in Israel of a new periphery. If the old periphery was non-Arab or non-Muslim peoples and states who we felt could ally with us against the Arab core, the notion of a new periphery is to go even further afield geographically in order to balance militant Islam. And militant Islam is not the Arabs with whom we're working, whether it's Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia. Militant Islam is Iran. On a day-to-day basis, Erdogan in Turkey, one day yes, one day no. The way to balance Iran, at least in terms of new periphery thinking, is to cultivate our relationship with Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan, which is on the northern flank of Iran, to whom we sold $5 billion worth of weapons in the past 5 years, paid for with oil, and here we are back to the oil issue again, and not unlike Iran in the days of the Shah, a totally autocratic country. And so here the question again arises, have we learned the lessons of ignoring the opposition that is working against a key strategic ally? Have we learned the lesson that you can't ignore them? That if you want to protect your investment, you're going to have to find clever ways, without angering the autocrat, but have to find clever ways to try to get a better understanding of what's going on, in this case in a country like Azerbaijan, back in the days of the Shah in Iran as well. Thank you very much.